Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, and Daniel, good to see you today.
Good to see you, sir.
Good. Over the weekend there was a major incident over the Sinai Peninsula. A plane went down, and now everybody's trying to sort out exactly what happened. And of course, it's the kind of thing that we talk about when we see escalation any place in the world. What kind of unintended consequences or what kind of intended consequences might occur to make the whole situation much worse. So this hasn't helped, and quite frankly, I don't know if anybody knows exactly what happened except the people who might have brought that plane down, if that is the case. But right now it looks like something had to bring the plane down rather than a computer failure and the plane didn't fly right. It looks to me like something very deliberate brought this plane down.
Yeah, the owner of the airplane, the airline that owns it, said that the plane was, quote, mechanically impacted, which suggests that something either from outside or inside. The other thing is that the crew was not able to communicate. There was a sudden catastrophic event that the crew was not able to communicate back with the towers. So that suggests something like...
And as people are going through the pros and cons and investigating and looking at the wreckage and all, it brings back memories when I was in the Air Force, because one of my duties as a flight surgeon was to be on accident investigation teams when there was a major accident. In the time I was in San Antonio at Kelly, there were two major accidents. There were minor accidents, but the two majors, there were deaths involved and plane crashes, this sort of thing. It was the most unlikable part of my job. I didn't like it. You had to go out to the accident site, and then it was very tedious and figuring this out. And even when they came to the final conclusion of some of these things, under those circumstances, I was never sure that they really knew what happened. I think there's more sophistication now in figuring out what happens, and it's not like this plane went down over water, making it more difficult. So looking at that wreckage and putting things together, and they have the black boxes, they're bound to find some information. But isn't it correct that we never got the full explanation of the Malaysian airliner that went down in Ukraine? I mean, there was information that was available, but for some reason we don't have access to it.
Yeah, it was 3 days after the plane crash. If you remember, John Kerry said, we know the Russians were involved. We have the intercepts. We know the exact trajectory of the missile. We have all the data. And then, the Russians and everyone said, okay, well then release the information. And the U.S. never released it, so we don't have that information. All we know from the final report were some very, very, very basic things, nothing about who was behind it. It was shot down by a Buk missile.
That it was a missile, but there were a lot of factions there. Not as many factions that there are in Syria right now, but there were several factions there that might have had access to these missiles. But this has always been my argument, is stay out of these troubled places, especially if we don't have a national security interest, because there are unintended consequences, and there are also, blowback consequences. The question here is, this is a plane, it's a Russian plane. It's flying over Egypt, from Egypt on up to where it was heading to
St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg, and it goes down. And who has an interest in shooting down a Russian airplane? I have a little trouble believing that if anybody would suggest, it's probably the Russians for some sinister reason they shot it down, that to me is too much of a stretch. But just from what I have read, I would lean away from the fact that it was just a mechanical failure, that there was something that exploded, unlikely a missile because it was so high, which means that it would probably be more likely a bomb on the airplane that could have done this. But then, even if you have that information, you say, well, who would benefit the most? Which faction might have done this?
Yeah, and you have to look at claims versus technical capabilities. Very shortly thereafter, a faction of ISIS claimed responsibility. They even released kind of a murky video of a plane going down without any real details. But the fact of the matter is, any kind of shoulder-launched missile could, at the absolute most sophisticated, reach about 20 to 25,000 feet in the air, and this plane was cruising at I think 31,000, so that's pretty unlikely.
Yeah, and I just don't think the super sophisticated missiles that would go higher were available to those individuals. So there'll be a lot of sorting out, but I cannot believe that this will, help settle things, in this region. One thing I think about and talk about so much from our viewpoint is that when we get involved, we're endangering our citizens, both our citizens overseas, our military personnel, and as well as sometimes blowback comes to our homeland and kills people here. So Russia, although they've been involved, they've always been supportive of Assad. So they're not on our side there. We're against Assad, they're for Assad. And then the terrorist groups would be anti-Assad. And Russia just recently, because of the chaos there, and it was almost stalemating, the Russians decided to, from their viewpoint, escalate for their benefits. But then the Russian airliner goes down. Yeah. So is this conceivable then that maybe somebody wants to teach the Russians a lesson?
Well, you could look at coincidences. They're never conclusive, but they always invite creative thinking. But if you remember, Friday was the Geneva meeting of a number of countries, including Iran for the first time, the U.S. and Russia, about how to deal with the Syrian problem, looking for a political solution. Now that meeting ended in a stalemate in a way, or it sort of broke apart without any final conclusions. The U.S. still insisting that Assad must go, and the Russians and Iranians insisting that the Syrian people should have the final vote. However, it does seem coincidental that those two events are so close. The other thing that's interesting is the Sinai Peninsula is, for such a huge chunk of territory, it's controlled by Islamist gangs. It's sort of a no-go area. ISIS-like gangs there, and then you look at how the U.S. has kind of played a double game with ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. That's kind of a murky mix that makes me very uncomfortable.
I would think the best way for us to deal with this would be prevention. Stay out of places like this. There's no reason for us to be in Syria for national security reasons. And there's a few people now speaking out in the Congress, but they should have been speaking out louder sooner about us getting involved illegally, unconstitutionally. No declaration of war, no authority. Obama at one time was prohibited from bombing because the Congress wouldn't give him the explicit authority, but they end up doing it anyway. And then he makes these promises about no boots on the ground, and then they move him in. And there are so many factions there to sort it all out. I am just so convinced that our country would be much better off if we would just stay out of these regions and let the local people deal with that. But the question then would be, okay, if we walked out, wouldn't that be just giving it all to the Russians? Yeah, well, one time we sort of gave it all to the Russians when they were in Afghanistan. They didn't do so well, so they still have to deal with the problems. But I thought it was sort of ironic when Obama said, okay, the Russians came in. They're going to be learning a lesson. They're going to get bogged down there. And I keep thinking, how could they get more bogged down in Syria than we're bogged down in Syria right now? So it's amazing they say these things, and it makes no sense whatsoever.
I remember there's an article on your RonPaulLibertyReport.com website a few weeks ago where it kind of jokingly said, the U.S. government has finally discovered blowback, but it's all about the Russians.
That blowing up of the Iranian airliner, the Navy thing, was an incident where, it was very clear, and we admitted it too, that we did it. But at the time, George H.W. Bush was vice president, and he had an interesting thing. He said, I will never apologize. I don't care what the facts are. And I thought, does that say something? The other day, it was close to a statement made by one of our bureaucrats. We can fly and sail any place we want to go, and it's that arrogance that is so bad. But I just think that we need to make a decision on, are we going to continue this type of policy or not? Right now, it's alive and well. The neocons have been suppressed a little bit. but they're really behind the scenes still in charge. Our Congress will not vote against it. Our Congress, the president does it on his own. Does the Congress raise Cain over this? No, but in a way, our program's not quite big enough to stir the interest of the American people to bug their congressman. You know, why are you doing this? And that is ultimately the way it's stopped. But just think how long it took the people to wake up the Congress over Vietnam. That's why, you know, after 60,000, and they say, well, I guess this is a mistake. I just think it's so much better to have a different policy that would prevent these problems.
Well, I think people may not realize, I spent a number of years in your office, in your congressional office. I think people may not realize how few calls it takes to really impact a congressional office. I know when we got even as little as 20 calls on a particular topic, if we could tell they were sincere calls, they weren't just reading off of a text, we paid attention, and the staff would get together and we would talk about people are concerned about this. Not that we would go tell you how to vote, but that this was an issue. So I think people, that are maybe watching the show, there may be only a few thousand, but that really is enough to get your congressman interested.
Especially those whose political antennas are always up, and that's how they deal with it. So it's tough to tell people, call your congressman, call them up, because what difference will it make? But it is true, there's not a whole lot else you can do if you want to change things. But it reflects my argument that whatever the people's attitude is the type of government you get. Even when they had the kings of old, when they lost support from the people, sometimes the king could lose his head. So yes, the attitude of the people. So, but that once again, you get back to attitudes, foreign policy attitude, monetary policy, Keynesian economics. If the majority of the American people, endorse it, and that is what people are being taught, that's what the government will be like. So that is the reason that the ultimate change comes when you change the attitudes of the people. And that, of course, is what this program is all about, trying to let the people know what's going on. We don't have the answers here today about this particular airplane going down and what will be the consequence, but it's just another item that we can use to make the point that a non-interventionist foreign policy is the best foreign policy that we could follow. And as it goes on, the sooner the American people find this out, the better. We made this point about the Benghazi hearings. Yes, they're having a lot of hearings, but they're political hearings. Both sides politically demagoguing this issue at the same time. Where were they, when our government and Obama decided under NATO to go into Libya? So yes, an ounce of prevention is worth many pounds of cure, and that is what we should be talking about, because that's what a liberty philosophy is all about, is preventing the problems, preventing the poverty, preventing the wars, and preventing the intrusion of our government into our civil liberties. That is what we have to prevent. So therefore, what we have to do is wake up enough American people to make sure that there's a response in Washington for these views. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.